Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a time before paper came in tidy rectangles with sticky flaps. Before the word stationery meant anything more than, well, something that doesn't move. A time when letters weren't just written, they were folded, shaped, locked, and sometimes even perfumed, because the envelope hadn't yet entered the chat. Picture it, a candle flickers low beside you. Your writing desk creaks faintly under the weight of parchment. There's ink smudged on your fingers, and in your lap lies a single sheet, your message to someone else. But how do you send it without anyone else reading it? How do you fold it so that it becomes its own container? You probably won't survive this era unless you have a firm grasp on wax, string, and the fine art of making your own envelope out of nothing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're already in bed, tell me your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where we're drifting off together from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a room that smells like old ink and warm parchment. The year, irrelevant. The air, damp, like the inside of a stone wall. You're somewhere between 1500 and 1800, depending on the draft that's sneaking through the shutters. And across the desk from you lies a stack of folded letters, each creased in a completely different way. One is locked with wax and bears the broken impression of a signet ring. Another is tucked into itself like a paper swan. One is folded into such a tiny triangle that it makes you wonder if the sender ran out of words, or had too many to say and only enough courage for this much paper. You pick up the first letter. It isn't sealed, but you feel a kind of resistance when unfolding it, as if the paper itself disapproves of your curiosity. This was the beauty of what's now called letter locking, a term historians gave it centuries later. People folded letters not only for privacy, but to show if someone had read it who shouldn't have. Because once you broke that seal or crease, there was no putting it back exactly the same. Even earlier than that, the Romans had their own version. Their letters were mostly on papyrus, and instead of envelopes, they tied the sheet shut with thread or twine, sometimes waxed, sometimes knotted in clever ways. If someone broke the thread or loosened the knots, you'd know. It's the ancient equivalent of leaving your phone unlocked at a party and realizing someone read your text. You lean over the candle now and catch the scent of heated wax, sweet, a little smoky. Back then, it wasn't just about sealing. The color of the wax might indicate urgency. The placement of the seal could suggest rank, and some people, the extra cautious ones, added slits, little cuts in the fold that tucked through other folds. Think of it as a Renaissance three-step password. Historians still argue whether some of the most elaborate folds were used for status or security. Were you trying to impress the recipient? Or just making sure your nosy cousin didn't sneak a peek? One of the most fascinating things is how personal these folds were. Some people folded the same way every time. It became a signature, like handwriting, but three-dimensional. There's even evidence that spies, lovers, and monarchs had their own trademark techniques. You didn't just read the words. The way they were locked told its own story. And just imagine, some of these letters never arrived, lost in the folds of time, dropped in puddles, carried off by pigeons with poor navigation skills, or hidden under floorboards, only to be discovered centuries later by stunned archivists who had to ask, what even is this paper triangle? You turn the letter over, run your fingers along the creases. One is folded in a spiral, coiled like a snail shell. Another looks like someone gave up halfway through a complicated napkin fold. And yet, all of them made it. Mostly, you can picture it now. A courier on horseback, a messenger boy dodging mud puddles, a lover pacing with ink-stained hands, waiting for a reply. And you're here, just beginning to unfold the long, gentle story of how letters used to breathe before envelopes zipped them shut. Let the wax melt. Let the fold hold. We're just getting started. The candle crackles softly beside you, and as the wax puddles, you lean over the desk, unfolding the story just a bit more. You're going further back now, to a time when even the idea of paper was new, strange, expensive, a luxury. You're in ancient Rome, or maybe just outside it, in a bustling little villa where someone's writing a note to a cousin, or a client, or a secret admirer. You'll never know which, but what you do know is that the message is scratched out on a strip of papyrus, slightly brittle, lined like a reed mat, and smelling faintly of river mud and lamp oil. Now comes the fun part, the folding. You watch as a scribe, or maybe just a careful housekeeper, takes the papyrus sheet and folds it inward. Once, then twice, then ties it with twine. Not string like you'd use to wrap a birthday gift, but something finer. Wax maybe, or dyed a little. So it's obvious if someone else has fiddled with it. There's no envelope here, no glue, no lick and seal, just folds and knots and hope. Some letters were so cleverly folded that breaking them open without tearing something was nearly impossible, like a Roman version of tamper-evident packaging, but with more flair and fewer angry plastic edges. One fun fact that often gets missed: some Roman letters weren't even addressed on the outside. You had to know which message was yours based on the seal, or the way it was folded, or the courier's cryptic expression. It's like getting a text message with no contact name and just vibes to guide you. Historians still argue whether the more intricate Roman folds were meant to indicate class or just reflect a household's domestic competence. Some scholars say wealthier senders had more time, and nicer twine, to make their letters secure and beautiful. Others think it was just a matter of habit. After all, once you fold one letter that way, why stop? And don't forget the wax. Even back then, wax wasn't just a security tool. It was branding. The seal on a Roman letter might bear a family crest, a god's face, or a motto. Strength through honor, or we don't talk about Uncle Gaius. Imagine receiving one. You untie the string. The papyrus creaks softly. You can still feel the heat of the sender's hand, faint but present. You unfold the first corner, then the second, until the words spill out, not in paragraphs, but in Roman square script, all caps, no spaces, no punctuation. Reading it is a bit like decoding your aunt's text messages with no grammar and extra emojis. Back in the present, you sit up a little straighter. One of the letters before you is an example of this Roman style. You pick it up, carefully, and notice that instead of being sealed with wax, it was pinched shut with a simple twist of ribbon, an early form of reusable security. You remember what we said in the last section: folds can tell their own stories. And Roman folds, well, they were some of the earliest to whisper secrets in crease lines and edge curls. Sometimes, a fold alone could be a message. Imagine sending a love note folded into the shape of a leaf, or a text a man creased into something rigid and sharp, subtle, but pointed. Quirky bit. Archaeologists once found a Roman letter still sealed, never opened, tied up neatly. No one dared unfold it. It had survived so many centuries untouched that untying it felt rude, like reading a diary you found in a museum's lost and found box. So now you lean back and think about it. No paper cutters, no envelopes, no autocorrect, just you, your hands, and the decision of how many folds say urgent, and how many say let this sit for a few days. The Romans didn't invent letter locking, but they made a good start of it. The idea that a message could protect itself, that you could fold privacy in, starts right here. It's all very analog encryption. You let your eyes fall back to the desk. 5 letters, 5 folding styles. One started in a villa with columns and dusty sandals, and that one made it here. Through time, through hands, through war and weather and someone spilling wine across a satchel at some point in the 3rd century. You smile, fold the corner back into place, and reach for the next. You ease the next letter into your hands, the parchment crackling like dry leaves. The folds are tighter now, more deliberate, more guarded. You're no longer in sunlit Roman courtyards. The light has dimmed, the paper has changed, and the world has grown a bit more secretive. Welcome to the medieval period. You're in a scriptorium now, where monks glide across parchment like ghosts in wool. The air smells of ink, candle smoke, and a trace of damp limestone. Every surface is covered in silence, broken only by the scratch of a quill and the occasional sneeze from too much dust. You're watching as a scribe finishes a letter, not a Bible, not a legal charter, but something more personal. It's a message to a bishop, or a noble, or perhaps a student far away. And the folding. This isn't just convenience anymore. This is protection. The scribe folds the parchment into a narrow panel, then again, tucking a tail of the sheet through a cut slit in the body of the letter. It's locked, almost woven. You try to unfold it in your mind, but you can't, because this isn't just a message. It's a container, a fortress made of fiber. This is where letter locking begins to become art, and no envelopes in sight. You lean closer. There's no wax seal yet, but already the folds themselves have created a tamper-proof system. The trick: you'd have to tear the paper to get it open, and that tear would betray you. If the reader received a letter with a missing tab or a jagged crease, suspicion flared like torchlight. Historians still argue whether medieval scribes learned these techniques from earlier sources, or whether they developed independently in different monasteries and cities. Some say this knowledge traveled slowly, on foot, folded into letters themselves, folded, sealed, and passed hand to hand like a whisper. And the secrecy wasn't just about love or politics. Sometimes it was about knowledge. Philosophers wrote to each other using folded letters that curled like scrolls but locked like diaries. And if a monk had an unpopular theological idea, or a juicy heresy, it was wrapped up so tightly you'd think it contained a sword. Let's not forget the wax, either. By now, it had become more than security. It was a status symbol. Noble men had signet rings with intricate crests. Sealing wax was colored, sometimes scented, and heated with custom candle flames. It left behind a perfect impression, unless, of course, someone used the classic imprint a coin and fake it trick. Medieval mail fraud. Still petty, still timeless. Now for a strange little detail. Some monks used watermarks, not printed ones, mind you, but fold-induced pressure marks, like ghost creases. These marks could help prove a letter's origin. Was it from the abbey in Tours, or a forger in some muddy barn? One fold could say everything. You reach for another folded letter on your desk. It smells faintly of lavender and thyme. This one was written by a merchant, probably around the 1300s, and folded with what's called a reverse tuck. You open it carefully, imagining hands not unlike yours wrapping up the sheet like a pastry, the final flap tucked inside, protected from rain, dirt, and suspicion. There's no envelope. Still, no outer wrapping. The paper is the envelope, and inside that paper, business arrangements, or directions for how to ship wool to Venice, or maybe a tiny, polite threat, worded in Latin. Of course, at the time, folded letters could function as legal documents, marriage arrangements, even accusations. The church sometimes sealed confessions this way. It made sense. A sealed fold was a sacred boundary. Quirk alert: some medieval lovers, usually those of noble rank, used their house crests as seals but placed them deliberately askew. A seal turned slightly to the left might say, "This is from me, but it's private," like the emoji you use when you mean it, but you don't want your partner's family to see. You picture one of those letters now, folded, sealed, slipped into a messenger's leather pouch, riding on horseback through damp forests, past toll gates and gossiping travelers. No stamps, no tracking numbers, just folded hope. And there's something cozy about that, isn't there? You run your finger along the edge of the parchment again. It's soft from time. The crease still holds. The seal is long gone, but the structure remains. The story it held may be forgotten, but the fold remembers. The candlelight dips again as you lift another letter, this one darker at the corners, the parchment rippling where damp fingers once lingered too long. It feels more complex, heavier, somehow, not in weight, but in design. You tilt it, and the folds hold tight like a secret refusing to budge. You're not in a monastery anymore. You're standing in the narrow corridor of a 13th century castle. The torches on the wall burn low. The air smells faintly of oil and wet stone, and someone in the next room is murmuring Latin at a legal clerk who is absolutely not paid enough. In your hand is a letter locked so cleverly that you almost don't want to try opening it. Because if you do, everyone will know. This is the age of slits, tabs, seals, and tricks. What began as neat folding has evolved into strategy. You watch as a steward prepares a message to be delivered to a neighboring barony. He folds the paper into thirds, then into quarters. Then he slices a narrow slit through the center, tucks a corner through the opening, loops another fold behind it, and then finally seals it with wax, right over the nut of it all. This isn't just origami. This is surveillance prevention, medieval edition. If you're imagining some dramatic Game of Thrones scenario, take a breath. Yes, there were spies and betrayals, but more often, these letters were about land boundaries, inheritance disputes, payment arrangements for grain. Still, the folding, impeccable. Historians still argue whether the complexity of these folds was more about signaling status or sending a warning, essentially saying, "You're not supposed to read this unless your name is on it, and if you do, we'll know." The kind of letter that silently accuses you just for touching it wrong. Let's add another layer. Some letters were designed to break if tampered with. Not metaphorically, literally. There was a style of folding that placed a small piece of ribbon or parchment through a tension slit, so tightly pulled that if anyone yanked on it, it tore. This wasn't elegance. It was engineering. And then came the visual cues. You'd find tiny pencil marks. Yes, pencils existed, but just barely, on the inside of folds to help the recipient know where to begin unfolding. The medieval equivalent of pull here, if the sequence was broken, well, someone opened your mail. There's a lovely detail in some royal correspondence from the time. A folded letter would sometimes bear a mark from the writer's nail, a tiny crescent-shaped press left when they closed the final flap. Unmistakable, unrepeatable, unless you had the same thumbnail and the same exact paranoia. You trace your fingers along one of the folded examples before you. It's got a tension fold, tight, sharp creases, the paper slightly cracked at the edges. You imagine the original sender licking a fingertip, pressing down the crease, and frowning slightly as they reached for the wax. Wax colors were getting more dramatic by now, too. Red, black, gold-flecked, and the seals. Oh, you had options. Family crests, mythological symbols, initials, even secret icons only the recipient would recognize. One noble woman in southern France used a personal seal shaped like a daisy. Not her name, not her family's emblem, just a quiet flower that said, "This is from me." Scholars still debate how much the letter-folding world overlapped with magical thinking. Some folded letters were placed in shoes for luck. Some were carried into battle. There's at least one account of a folded letter being buried with its sender, unread, because it was considered too powerful to open. You set that one down carefully. Let's not get haunted. Instead, pick up another, a merchant's contract. This one's practical, square, folded with a diagonal tuck and sealed with cheap brown wax. Still secure, though, still reliable. He likely sent hundreds like this over the years, arranging trades in wool, salt, pepper. And yes, pepper was basically currency, folded in pepper folds, you might say. Here's a quirky detail. Sometimes, entire families had signature folds, like a folding style passed down generationally. You'd recognize a cousin's letter not just from the seal or handwriting, but from how they creased the corners, like a recipe, only in geometry. You start to notice the difference in weight, too. Letters folded for privacy were tight, layered, often dense. Letters folded for show, airier, flatter, designed to be opened gracefully by candlelight. You imagine some unfortunate clerk tasked with opening 40 of these a day, squinting at badly folded flaps and cursing nobility under his breath. And you're sitting in silence, surrounded by creased paper and soft light, wondering why it feels so reassuring. Maybe it's the tactility, maybe it's the structure, or maybe, just maybe, it's that folding something into itself feels a little like protecting a secret. And tonight, we've only just started. You take a breath, slow and even, and let your fingers drift toward the next letter in the pile. This one's crisp at the edges, the folds tighter still, as if whoever sent it didn't trust the paper to behave without stern instruction. It smells faintly of rosemary and starch, neat, serious, and maybe just a little too perfect. You're in Tudor England now. The year is somewhere around 1582, and you're standing in the corner of a chamber dimly lit by morning sun squeezing through lattice windows. Below, the city of London murmurs with carts and gossip. But here, above it all, a woman sits at a small table, folding a letter with exquisite care. Her name, you're not entirely sure, but it's possible she answers to Lady. And it's entirely likely the letter in her hand contains something far more interesting than gardening tips, because this is the era of courtly gossip, political plots, and folded messages that doubled as shields. And when it comes to secret communication, the Tudors had a flair for drama. The letter she folds is made of sturdy rag paper, thicker than parchment, more reliable than vellum. She's written in fine iron gall ink, careful loops, each sentence balanced like a performance. Once dry, the folding begins. First, the corners fold inward toward the center. Then she rotates the page diagonally. One flap overlaps another in a tight diamond pattern. A small slit, cut with the tip of a knife, is tucked open. A tail of the paper is threaded through and pulled gently. The whole structure clicks together with the softest snap. It doesn't need glue. It locks itself, like a paper puzzle box. Only after this ritual does she reach for the wax. And not just any wax. Hers is red beeswax infused with herbs, pressed with a seal she wears on a ribbon around her neck. The crest of her family, crossed with a subtle sigil meant for only one person to recognize. This is more than security. This is signaling. Historians still argue whether the complex folds and secret slits of Tudor letters were meant to confuse interceptors or just show off political savvy. Some claim every noble household had its own preferred fold, like a signature dance at court. Others believe that some folds were so complex, they served as passive encryption. If you didn't know how to unfold it, you couldn't even read it right. You trace the letter in your hands. It matches what was once found in the State Papers archive, a tuck and slit letter sent from a diplomat in France back to Queen Elizabeth's Privy Council. The contents weren't all that scandalous, just updates on a dinner meeting, but the fold was so complex that it took modern researchers a full hour to reverse engineer it. A favorite trick during this time, inverted sealing. Instead of placing the wax seal on the outside flap, some writers would place it inside the final fold. So, if the letter was opened without permission, the seal was lost entirely. It was like a red fingerprint embedded in paper. Touch it wrong, and it vanished. You glance across the chamber. A gentleman paces, a frown on his face. He's deciding whether to send a reply, whether to trust the courier, whether to write at all. Because in this world, a single fold could cost you your life. Spies folded letters in odd shapes to avoid association. Lovers folded letters into tiny squares and tucked them into gloves or bodices. Occasionally, a note would be sewn shut with thread, literally stitched into fabric so the recipient had to cut it open with a blade. No wax, no seal, just cotton and courage. Here's a strange little tidbit. Scholars uncovered one letter from this era written in code and sealed with a lock fold that required 5 steps to undo. The message itself, a list of baked goods. Apparently, even Tudor bakers didn't trust their competitors. You set down that example with a half smile. Some things never change. As the day wanes in your imagined Tudor room, you can almost hear the creak of floorboards, the long, slow exhale of secrets being passed through hand-folded messages. There are no inboxes, no read receipts, only the weight of wax and paper and the hope that the right person will receive it. One letter is passed to a servant girl. She tucks it under her bodice. Another is sent by horse to a country estate. The fold's protected from mud, from rain, from being misunderstood. Because meaning, in the message, it's in the way the letter holds itself together. Tonight, as you listen, the paper rustles softly in your mind. You fold it once, twice. You slide the corner through the slit, and just like that, you're holding a whisper. And just like that, someone centuries ago is holding it too? You don't know exactly when it started. This hush that fills the room when your hands touch the next letter. But it's there, like a pause before a deep breath. This one feels different, heavier with history, not because it's thick or grand, but because this fold was made under pressure, possibly fear. You're in the 1600s now, somewhere in Europe, maybe London, maybe Florence, maybe Vienna, where whispers pass faster than trust. The religious wars are in full swing. Monarchs are paranoid, and secrets could get you exiled or worse. And the letter you're holding, it's locked, not metaphorically, literally. What you've stumbled upon is what scholars today call the security spiral, a style of folding so intricate, so carefully layered, that opening it without detection was nearly impossible. This isn't just a fancy fold. This is a quiet act of rebellion. You watch as someone prepares one now. The sender wears a velvet coat and a slightly too stressed expression. They lean over their desk. Low candlelight, wax at the ready, and their pulse visible at the base of the neck. You realize, with some amusement, that the contents of the letter aren't nearly as important as the effort going into sealing it. The fold begins with a diagonal crease, followed by a roll inward, the corners tucked under and around in such a way that the tail of the letter becomes a locking pin. It ends with the insertion of a tiny tab through two slits cut not randomly, but precisely measured so that the slightest wrong pull will tear them. Then comes the wax seal. Of course, this one is black wax, stamped with a ring that bears no insignia, just a plain circle. Intentional anonymity. Historians still argue whether black wax indicated mourning, secrecy, or simply a lack of allegiance. Some think it was a way to say, this message is personal, not political. Others suspect it was a quiet rebellion in and of itself, an envelope for thoughts not meant to be recorded, only delivered. You begin to realize that these folds were more than functional. They were performances, each letter a stage, each seal an act, and the recipient the only audience member who mattered. The recipient in this case, possibly a lover, possibly a spy, possibly someone who would recognize the way the paper smelled, faintly of cloves and parchment glue, and understand the urgency of the fold. Certain folding styles indicated specific levels of confidentiality. A wide spiral might mean open in private. A tightly layered square could mean burn after reading. And here's where things get even more dramatic. Enter the false fold. You run your fingers across the paper and find that a section of it has been deliberately misfolded, not by accident, but on purpose. A trap. Someone, perhaps expecting interference, folded the letter to create two openings, one visible, harmless, and meant to be read by prying eyes. The second, hidden beneath a crease, sealed with wax between folds, containing the real message. Yes, it's exactly as cool as it sounds. Spy movies have nothing on 17th century paranoia. In fact, some letters even came with decoy seals, a second seal placed on a visible flap with an innocuous phrase or crest, while the true seal lay hidden deeper in the fold. You had to know to break the first, then unfold again, then look for the second wax mark. A secret within a secret. And if you didn't, well, you'd think the letter was just a merchant invoice, or an update on livestock, or a recipe for stew. Boring on the outside, dangerous at the core. One particularly quirky tidbit. Some noblemen began using musical notation as folding cues. A single line of notes written on the fold itself indicated where to pull, where to tuck. The idea being, if you couldn't read music, you couldn't unlock the letter. Imagine your Netflix password being hidden in a piano chord. The letter you're holding now feels like that. Ordinary, but humming with intent. Its folds are sharp, confident. The wax was pressed with a quick, decisive motion. And you wonder, was the sender scared? Or just very, very good at pretending not to be? In some archives, preserved letters of this era show tiny fingerprints caught in wax, ghosts of their senders. It's oddly intimate, knowing someone's hands pressed this seal, probably with a shaky breath and a hope it would make it to its destination unopened. But of course, They couldn't be sure. No one ever could. You set the letter down. The candle is lower now, its puddle of wax spreading softly across the table. The light flickers gently on the creased lines of dozens of other folded letters, each one a message, a risk, a whisper. And for all their differences in language or script or purpose, they share one truth. The fold protects, it hides, it reveals, it decides who is allowed in. And as you lean back, you realize you're not just reading letters. You're listening to the language of paper and hand and seal, the subtle grammar of security before passwords and PIN codes and private browsing. And the story, it's just starting to open. The next letter you reach for feels lighter in your hand, but there's nothing casual about it. Its triangular fold is so clean, so perfectly pressed, you'd think it was made by someone folding linens rather than paper. The parchment itself is fine, cream-colored, barely textured, and it carries a scent that's hard to place. Not wax, not dust, not time. Perfume. You bring it closer. It's faint, floral, a touch sweet, like pressed violets or maybe orange blossom water. And the fold. Oh, it's exquisite. Crisp creases tuck into one another like flower petals. This isn't a message born of urgency or war. This is a letter folded in love. You're in Versailles now. Late 1700s. The halls echo with the swish of silk skirts and the clack of polished heels. Courtiers move like dancers. Gossip sticks like sugar to every corner. And the air is thick with powdered wigs and powdered intentions. You pass through the corridors, trailing someone who walks faster than propriety allows, a folded letter clutched in gloved fingers. This is Marie Antoinette's court, and folded notes here are not just about privacy. They are flirtation, politics, dangerous theater. Every letter folded carries more than ink. It carries motive. You find yourself in a drawing room, soft candlelight pulling on polished wood. A woman, highborn, with mischief in her eyes, finishes her letter and begins folding it, humming as she does. First one edge, then the next, then a corner twisted into a curl, and finally the tip tucked neatly behind the base. It doesn't look secure by modern standards, but make no mistake, this is as locked as any steel safe in a world of surveillance by servant. No seal, no string, just the triangular cord fold, often passed hand to hand, never by official courier, hidden in a sleeve, slipped behind a mirror, dropped in a gloved palm mid-curtsy. Historians still argue whether Marie Antoinette herself used these exact folding styles. Some letters attributed to her are folded this way, others are not. Some experts claim she preferred open parchment, easy to destroy, nothing to conceal. Others suggest that her most private letters, the ones to Axel von Fersen, the maybe lover maybe not, were folded this way because they could be unfolded and read without obvious damage. Perfect for love letters that needed to seem untouched even after being passed through dozens of hands. Because remember, in court, the wrong person knowing you folded a note at all could end your evening, or your marriage, or your inheritance. You run a finger along the edge of the triangular fold in your hand now. It's so neat it almost sighs under your touch. And inside, probably a half flirtation, half poem, a jab at someone's perfume choice, or be instructions for how to bribe a valet. Because here, everything was a performance, even the paper. Here's a fun little tidbit. Courtiers sometimes used folding language. That is, they assigned meanings to the way a letter was folded. A triangle sealed with a red ribbon might mean I'm furious. A diamond fold with no seal. Let's meet where no one sees. It was like emojis, but harder to decode and a lot more likely to get you poisoned. You imagine, now, two ladies standing near a piano, one slipping a triangle into the other's embroidered fan. They don't make eye contact. They don't need to. The paper does the talking. You lift another letter. This one more fragile. The edges are worn, the perfume long faded, but the fold holds. It tells you someone once folded it with purpose, pressed it shut with more feeling than caution, and handed it off to someone who may or may not have deserved it. And then, like now, it traveled silently. No stamps, no envelope, just creases and scent and subtext. There's an odd, lovely piece of court etiquette buried in a letter from this era, If you couldn't fold a letter beautifully, it was better not to write at all. Presentation mattered, and if you sent someone a letter with poor creases, they'd assume you were either ill-bred or unwell, possibly both. One nobleman was known to judge the emotional stability of a suitor based solely on how tight or uneven her letter folds were. Emotional folding diagnostics, perhaps ahead of its time. Tonight, the candle beside you gutters. The light dances on the wax seal of one of the less perfumed letters. You wonder how many of these survived. How many were burned? How many were opened and never answered? And then you remember, you're holding them now. Still folded. Still waiting. You fold one yourself, slowly, corner, tip, tuck, and in that small act, you understand what the court at Versailles knew too well. Sometimes, the fold is more honest than the words. You run your thumb along the top of the next letter. It's unusually stiff, and the folds are tight enough to resist your touch. There's no perfume this time, no frills, no dainty corners or flirtatious curves. This one is practical, intentional, heavy in your palm like a coin you're not meant to spend. You're standing in a dimly lit war room now, somewhere in Europe, maybe France or Prussia. It's the early 1800s, and the sound of boots echo on stone floors. The world is no longer powdered wigs and secret fans. This is the age of dispatches, officers, and folded letters that travel further than ever before, because their senders might not come back. You're beside a soldier, a young man with smudged hands and a jaw set too tight for his age. He's hunched over a battered writing desk. Outside the tent flap, the wind rattles with orders and horses. But in here, everything is quiet, focused. He writes not to his commander, not even to the quartermaster. He's writing to someone back home. His wife, maybe, his father, or a friend who once shared bread with him on a quiet afternoon. He signs it quickly, then he begins to fold. And this, you realize, is the battlefield fold. Practical, compact, but deeply personal. It's a style designed to be tough enough to survive a march, a storm, even the bottom of a knapsack trampled under cavalry. The paper is creased into a compact rectangle, doubled over again, then locked with a corner folded in and held in place by tension alone. No wax, no seal, because on the battlefield, wax could melt, and time was a luxury. Historians still argue whether these simple folds were innovations of necessity or borrowed from older letter-locking techniques. Some say soldiers were trained in the method. Others believe it emerged naturally, one of those convergences where practicality meets intuition. You hold one now. It's yellowed, marked in a corner with a faint water stain shaped like a leaf. There's no address, only a name in pencil, rubbed nearly away. But the fold has held, all these years. There's a fringe belief among collectors that soldiers infused these letters with meaning just by how tightly they folded them, that a three-fold meant desperation, and a two-fold meant hope, that someone, somewhere, could read the crease as clearly as the ink. And maybe they could. You picture one of these letters passed quietly between uniforms, or pressed into a general's hand before battle, or tucked under a pillow with no words at all, just that familiar fold saying everything it needed to say. A quirky anecdote, one letter from this era, found in the pocket of a fallen soldier, was folded into a hexagon. Not a standard fold, no signature, no wax. Historians have puzzled over it ever since. Was it a superstition, a symbol, a private joke between brothers? No one knows. But the letter still exists, unopened, out of respect. You unfold the letter in your hands now, just enough to see the shadow of ink. The handwriting is cramped, rushed, but the fold, it's careful, pressed with deliberation. A contradiction that tells you the sender had something urgent to say and wanted it to arrive untouched. This is when folds began to take on a kind of humility, less ornate, more focused. The art of letter locking didn't die here. It changed shape, became invisible. The lock was no longer for vanity, but for preservation, for survival, to endure time, not impress it. Back in your imagined war tent, the soldier pockets his folded message. He doesn't think much of it. Just paper, just words, just one small square of hope among 1,000 uncertainties. And yet, Centuries later, here you are, holding it, feeling it, and somehow, it still speaks. The candle beside you flutters gently in the draft. You look again at the stack before you, and suddenly the differences in fold styles begin to feel like fingerprints. Time-stamped, emotion pressed, a history of hands, written not just in ink, but in the tension of paper bent carefully in the quiet. Tonight, that quiet wraps around you too. So, you fold your own scrap of paper, slowly, once, twice, again, and you wonder, if you tucked it into your coat and walked out into the wind, who would one day unfold it and know you are here? The next letter sits in the middle of the stack, wider than the rest, and gently bowed, like it spent a long time under something heavier. Maybe a book or the flat press of a drawer no one dared open for decades. Its folds are soft, curved at the edges like a smile that's forgotten it was ever tense. This one, you sense, has traveled less. Maybe it lived its whole life in one house. And now, so do you. Welcome to 19th century rural America, somewhere between the crackle of a fireplace and the creak of a floorboard. You're in a small, drafty parlor, the wallpaper's beginning to peel in one corner, and the glass window shivers at the edge of a storm. A woman, perhaps in her 50s, apron slightly flour-dusted, sits at a writing desk built by someone who loved her, and she's composing a letter. Not to the president, not to a court, but to her sister, halfway across the state. She writes slowly, carefully. She pauses often. She smiles to herself once, remembers a joke too quiet for the ink to catch, and then, when the words are done, she folds. What she creates is called a cross letter, and now things get strange. Instead of writing on just one side of the paper, she's written vertically and horizontally, one layer of script across the other, like a gentle grid of thoughts. This is because paper is expensive, ink is precious, and postage is calculated by the number of sheets, not by weight or size, but how many pieces of paper you send. So the fewer sheets, the better, and that means maximizing every inch, including the folds. Once her message is done, she folds it in thirds, then quarters. Then she turns it into its own envelope by tucking the final flap under. No glue, just friction and good behavior. On the outside, she writes the address, top left corner, and maybe a short blessing on the flap, with Godspeed or answer when able. Historians still argue whether this practice of crossing letters was more common in frontier towns or simply more preserved in those regions because rural homes held onto their papers longer. City folk often tossed old correspondence, but in the countryside, you saved everything, because everything might matter again. You glance at the letter in your hand. The folds are faded but holding, and yes, you see it, writing layered in perpendicular strokes, like a diary to show its face outright. There's a quirky little trick some women used. They'd use lemon juice to write the first layer of a letter. Then they'd write over it in visible ink. When warmed near a fire, the lemon writing would reappear, an old-school two-layered message, almost invisible until activated. Letters within letters, secrets within pleasantries. You can almost see the fireplace now. The flicker on her face as she warms the paper to read the faint words hidden beneath. Her husband doesn't know. Her children don't notice. But her sister. She read every line, and then fold it back up, neatly, reverently, and place it between the pages of a Bible. Not out of piety, necessarily, but because that was the only book that never got thrown out. A letter folded into scripture, a conversation preserved between prayers and psalms. You feel the warmth of the fire now, the creak of a rocking chair across the room, the wind scratching lightly at the door, and in the woman's hand, the letter. Folded? Yes, but more than that. Tended? Touched with care. There's something beautiful about how domestic this letter feels. It isn't guarded like the spy folds. It isn't romantic like the perfume triangles. It's just honest. Here's the practical side of all this. The fold served double duty. Not only did it save money on envelopes, it also kept the letter self-contained. You didn't need a wax seal, just a sticker, or a pin, or even a dab of honey. Some used a drop of flour paste. It would hold just long enough to reach its reader. The version you hold, closed with a sewing pin, left in, bent slightly. You wonder if the recipient removed it with a wince, or if they kept it, pin and all, in a kitchen drawer next to old buttons and lengths of string. You fold the letter again, feeling the softness of time beneath your fingers, and suddenly, you're aware that not every fold was meant to protect secrets. Some just protected connection. A sister to a sister, a mother to a son far from home, a widow to her future self, writing something she might need to read again in a year. Outside, the storm picks up, the candle gutters, but inside, the paper is warm, steady, folded in peace. And you're holding a moment that didn't want to be forgotten. Your fingers hesitate just slightly before lifting the next letter. It's shorter, narrower than the others, almost hesitant in its shape. The paper is thin, translucent at the corners, and the fold is unfamiliar, asymmetrical, as if made in haste or by someone improvising. It rustles with the softest breath of sound, like someone about to speak, but thinking better of it. You're in early Meiji-era Japan, around the 1870s. The world is shifting beneath everyone's feet. Feudal customs are unraveling. Steam engines are huffing through cities that were once horsebound, and paper, so long revered, is beginning to move with new purpose. The art of the letter remains, but the way it is folded now straddles centuries. In a quiet Kyoto home, you sit beside a young scholar. His robe is simple, his ink stone smoothed from years of use. He dips his brush into ink, writes vertically, carefully, each character drawn like a breath held and released. He is writing to a teacher, or perhaps a friend now posted to Tokyo. The script is polite, formal, the message wrapped in bowing language and metaphor, and when he finishes, he lays the brush down with a sigh. Then he reaches for the washi paper envelope he's made himself. But it's not a Western-style envelope, not yet. Instead, he uses a traditional Tado fold, a Japanese method that folds a sheet into a small, layered packet, tucking edges so precisely that the folds themselves hold everything in place. Tado folds have been used for centuries to deliver gifts, herbs, incense, or messages. This one holds only a letter, and the fold he uses, triangular flaps pulled inward, then pinched flat, resembles an origami gesture more than any Western letter lock. Historians still argue whether Japanese folding styles directly influenced European letter locking during trade periods, or whether both traditions simply evolved in parallel. What's clear is this: both cultures understood that a fold is part of the message. In Japan, especially, the presentation was not separate from content. How a letter was folded said as much as what it contained. A sharply creased letter could indicate urgency. A loose fold could imply intimacy. A letter tied with red silk, probably romantic, white ribbon, probably ceremonial, or funereal. You trace the folds on this one. A simple tuck, held with no glue, no wax. Instead, it was closed with a sticker made of pressed rice paper, embossed faintly with a family crest, a plum blossom, soft and nearly faded. The adhesive was natural, mild, meant to peel without tearing. That in itself was a message. Please read me gently. There's a small quirk from this period that makes you smile. Students often folded their letters in strange, experimental shapes. A letter to a friend might be folded like a fan. A love note, shaped like a crane. The idea wasn't to make opening easier, it was to make it memorable. A note you could open once and then never quite refold the same way again. You imagine that now. A girl unfolding a bird-shaped letter, wings spreading softly in her palm, her friends leaning in, laughing quietly behind hands. The fold is flirtation. It lingers longer than the words. You gently press the letter flat again and pick up another. This one more refined, an official communication. But even here, the fold matters. It's wider, formal, the paper textured like silk. This letter was probably tied with twine dyed in indigo, passed through several hands before arriving at its destination. No wax, again, just a loop and a knot, and the promise that no one unworthy dared touch it. Folded messages in Japan were also frequently accompanied by name slips, small inserts tucked into the fold that bore the sender's name and rank. Sometimes, these were more important than the letter itself. Misplacing a name slip could cause offense, or worse, confusion. And while it's easy to romanticize these gestures, they had weight. There are records of court disputes over improperly folded letters, of rejections based on creased messages perceived as disrespectful. One nobleman is said to have returned a folded letter unopened because the flap face left instead of right, considered an omen of misfortune. You laugh softly, fussy, perhaps, but in a world built on ritual, the fold was part of the sentence. You close your eyes for a moment. You're sitting in that Kyoto room again. The candle burns low. The letter rests, folded, between two paperweights shaped like turtles. Outside, the wind brushes gently at the shoji screen. Nothing moves quickly here. Everything is considered. You bring the letter back to your table, gently tuck the corners together, and place it aside. No need to open it. You already understand it. You're not sure at first if the next piece in the stack is even a letter. It's thick, stiff in the center, but soft at the edges, as though it once lived tucked into a coat pocket, maybe flattened under a ledger or tied into a bundle with a dozen others. But when you flip it over, slowly, you see the fold. A wide panel turned inward, two sides hugging around the center, and a final flap pressed down across the front. It's not elegant. It's not beautiful. But it's entirely functional, entirely industrial. Welcome to Victorian Britain, somewhere between a coal fire and a cluttered writing desk, where the middle class is rising, the post is booming, and letters are no longer a noble privilege. They are everyone's habit. The year is 1853. You're in a modest home in Manchester. The wallpaper is loud, the kettle forever on the edge of boiling, and the air smells faintly of wool and ink. A clerk sits in the corner, writing by lamplight. He's writing to his brother in Liverpool, or to an old school friend now working the docks. The letter itself is not romantic, nor rebellious. It's about business, mostly, but the fold, that's where it gets interesting, because this is the era of the Mulready letter sheet. Before the envelope, as we know it, fully took hold, Britain's postal system introduced a clever idea: printed sheets of paper that folded into their own envelope, with postage included. You wrote your message, folded it up following the pre-marked creases, sealed it, and voila, no need for a separate stamp or covering. And the best part, it was cheaper. So naturally, people loved it, or they didn't. Historians still argue whether the Mulready sheets were too odd-looking or simply too unfamiliar. The elaborate printed design, meant to honor British progress and unity, looked more like a propaganda flyer than a letter. Some people even turned them into satirical art, drawing mustaches on Queen Victoria or reusing the designs as wrapping paper. Still, the fold stuck around, and as you examine the one in your hand now, you can see the legacy: the panel fold. Fold up from the bottom, fold in from the sides, seal the top flap, a neat, postal-ready rectangle. It's this practicality that would help standardize the envelope over the next few decades. The Victorians were obsessed with order, and mail was no exception. Folding became standardized, predictable, clean, but not everyone followed the template. You turn over another letter, slightly uneven in its edges. This one has been folded diagonally, then wrapped once around, almost like a scroll folded into a packet. It's from a servant to a family member, likely a personal note tucked discreetly under a mattress or into a coat lining. Because not every letter passed through the Royal Mail. Some had to travel quietly, privately. Here's a quirky practice: franking. Before the penny post, members of Parliament had the right to send letters for free if they signed the outside. So, clever citizens would ask MPs to pre-sign blank sheets. Then, they'd write their message later, fold it, and send it off, postage-free. A folded letter became a vehicle for a favor, for politics, for a wink and a savings. Even the folds could indicate class. A precisely creased, stiffly sealed letter meant formality, perhaps from a barrister or banker. But a softer, unevenly folded one with ink smudged at the corners, probably a grandmother's letter, or a poet's. Some Victorians even tucked small keepsakes into folds: a pressed flower, a curl of hair, a folded prayer. They'd be wedged under a corner flap, sealed in like memory foam. These things weren't mentioned in the letter. They were felt. You hold one such letter now. The paper is soft, nearly threadbare at the edges, and there's a faint imprint of what was once pressed inside. Maybe a lock of hair, maybe a bit of ribbon. It's gone now, but the memory of it remains in the way the paper still puffs slightly near the crease. And this was the era, too, when folded paper became science. Stationers competed to create pre-folded note paper, printed with witty greetings or morning borders. Some even had embedded watermarks you could see only when held to candlelight, a security measure and a fashion statement. Folding machines were introduced for bulk letters, but hand-folded notes remained popular for one reason: they felt more human, more intentional, more like someone cared. You place the panel-fold letter down, quietly. Its folds are still sharp, its edges faintly yellowed. You imagine the sender's hands, ink-stained, calloused from labor, or perhaps to many long afternoons writing ledgers, pressing the final flap down with a thumb, sealing it with a damp sponge and a sigh. Not poetic, not dramatic, but deeply, wonderfully normal. And somehow, that's the fold that lingers. There's a kind of hush that settles as you reach for the next letter, like even the paper is unsure of itself. It's not as old as the rest. No wax seal, no yellowed edges, no flowery script or spidery ink. But it has something else, a certain deliberateness in the way it's folded, a crease made by someone who paused before pressing down. You're in early 20th century Berlin now, around 1910. The world is on the cusp of so much: electric lights in the streets, phonographs in drawing rooms, trains roaring across countries. But here, in a quiet apartment, with the ticking wall clock and the soft clatter of teacups from next door, someone is folding a letter. She's a school teacher, perhaps, or university student writing home. The paper is pale blue, crisp and mass-produced, with fine-ruled lines that guide each sentence like steps in a dance. She writes in clear, careful German, with just a hint of flourish at the capitals. Her handwriting is confident, but her fold, that's where her heart slips in. She creates a booklet fold, now more common due to standardized paper sizes. The sheet is halved, then halved again, and sometimes folded once more into a slim, elegant rectangle, tall, like a pamphlet. No wax, just the friction of paper against paper, and maybe a sticker or a touch of glue on the final flap. This is the era of envelopes. Yes, but also the persistence of personal habit. Many people still fold their letters themselves, sealing them lightly, especially for family correspondence. The letter becomes its own enclosure. It carries itself. Historians still argue whether this style was a rejection of the overdone Victorian flourish or a simple adaptation to postal systems that demanded speed and uniformity. But between those folds, you can still find a kind of softness. One lovely detail from this time: some letters include punctual codes, tiny penciled symbols at the bottom of the last page. A triangle might mean "please write soon," a circle, "miss you." Some families invented their own secret marks, passed down like recipes, not encrypted, just personal. And here's something you wouldn't expect: even graph paper was sometimes used for folding guides. A young engineer might write a letter to his fiancée and use the squares to ensure each fold landed just so. Engineers folded like they built bridges, measured, aligned, and structurally sound. Their love letters looked like diagrams. You examine the letter in your hand. It's one of those engineer folds, perfect lines, the crease still crisp even now. The writing inside is clean, precise, maybe even a little stiff. But the way the fold hugs itself, you know it mattered. Folded letters from this period often contained carbon paper duplicates, especially for official business. A single sheet placed beneath the original would copy the words in pale gray to another page, and some people, not trusting the post, would keep the carbon copy folded into a second compartment, like a backup promise. Here's a quirky tidbit: some postcards were folded like letters, sealed with a paperclip or wax dot just long enough to hide their contents. Semi-private correspondence sent through a system not designed for secrecy. A folded flirtation disguised as a simple hello from Vienna. You smile at the thought. In this era, folding became invisible. It wasn't an art anymore. It was an expectation. Efficient, unassuming. But for those who paused, who folded carefully, there was still meaning in every crease. You picture a young woman receiving a folded letter from her brother at the front lines. She smooths it flat with the palm of her hand. She reads it once, then again, then folds it exactly as she found it, like muscle memory. The folds help her remember the weight of his words, the slant of his G, the way he signed his name. She tucks it into her coat pocket, folds facing out, so she can run her fingers along the crease and know it's still there. Letters from this time often lived inside metal tins, carried through wars, over oceans, through immigration and heartbreak. The folds, tight, tidy, kept the contents legible even when everything else frayed. You close your eyes for a moment. You're in a train car now. The seat beneath you vibrates softly. In your hand is a letter from someone far away. You fold it into quarters and press the crease with your fingernail, then slide it back into your coat pocket, right over your heart. Because even when envelopes exist, even when stamps are cheap and paper abundant, the fold is still what makes it yours. And now, you open your eyes. The letter rests in your lap, still folded, still saying something only you were meant to hear. This one feels familiar, not ancient, not aristocratic, not perfumed or folded with courtly flair, just regular, practiced, honest. You hold it up and see the faint traces of blue ink, the kind that fades after too much time in a shoebox. The paper is soft, but not fragile. It was folded crisply once, but opened and refolded so many times the corners have rounded, like a stone made smooth by years in a river. You're in mid-20th century America, somewhere between Kansas and California, in a kitchen that smells like cinnamon toast and wood polish. A woman, maybe a grandmother, maybe a mother of 6, is sitting at a table that wobbles slightly in the corner. She's writing to someone overseas. Her son, her husband, a neighbor boy drafted 6 months ago. It's 1943, and folded letters have become lifelines. This is the era of V-mail, Victory Mail, one of the most curious postal inventions in modern history. Soldiers overseas would write their letters on special forms, which were then photographed, reduced to microfilm, flown across the ocean, then reprinted and delivered to loved ones as shrunken facsimiles. Efficient, but impersonal. So, many families wrote back the old-fashioned way. And folding, well, it became personal again. The letter you're holding isn't V-mail. It's a folded sheet of lined notebook paper, creased down the middle, then once again, like a tall rectangle meant to slide easily into an envelope or a soldier's chest pocket. Folded with care, and maybe a little too much pressure at the edges, as if someone pressed the creases, hoping it would help the words inside hold tighter, travel safer. Historians still argue whether this informal folding style was born out of wartime scarcity or simply emotional necessity. There was no prescribed way to do it, just the quiet understanding that folded letters needed to survive more than just distance. They had to survive longing. You turn the paper slightly and notice a smudge near one corner. Maybe a thumbprint, maybe a stray bit of cooking grease. The ink bubbles where the pen paused too long. It's not art, it's life. A fringe detail from this time. Some families reused paper, folding over a previous letter, writing between the lines, not out of poverty, necessarily, but to keep everything together, like writing a new chapter right on top of the old one. And in every household, folded letters began to stack, tied with ribbon, filed in drawers, tucked into family Bibles or shoeboxes or tucked beneath mattress corners. Each fold, a moment, a voice, a day someone wanted to remember or forget. There's a quiet anecdote buried in a veteran's memoir. He describes receiving a letter that smelled faintly of home, not perfume, just the house, the way the hallway smelled after rain. And when he unfolded the letter, the fold released it like a ghost, just for a second, then it was gone. You smooth the letter in your lap. The creases are delicate now, like fine wrinkles on a well-loved face. It's been read often, folded, unfolded, folded again, and each time, it softened a little more, until it no longer snapped shut, but curled inward, like it was trying to hug itself. During this era, some teenagers folded notes to one another in school. Clever little triangles and envelope-like shapes passed between lockers and pencil cases. A different kind of wartime, less formal, just as precious. And then there were chain letters, folded and refolded, with messages urging the recipient to pass it on or face vague, cosmic consequences. Most were harmless. Some promised miracles. Many ended up folded into the back pockets of hopeful kids or skeptical parents. The folds were often more interesting than the message. You laugh a little now, gently, because that's still true sometimes. There's a simple, overlooked truth in all this. The act of folding is also the act of closing, of sending, of letting go. You imagine a woman at that table in 1943, pressing down the final corner of a letter with a sigh. Maybe she doesn't know what to say anymore. Maybe she says it anyway. Maybe the fold is the hardest part, because it means the words are finished, and all that's left is the waiting. She licks the flap of the envelope, seals it, and presses the crease one last time, just in case. You sit back, looking at your stack of letters, most of them folded long before you were born, and yet, each one carrying something familiar, because folding is not just a gesture, it's a connection. It says, here, I made this, for you. You reach for the next letter, and this one is oddly light, as if even the words inside it try to take up less space. The fold is loose, delicate, and almost shy in its presentation. It's paper that doesn't want to be too bold, too crisp, too certain. You're in India now, somewhere around the 1950s, in a sunlit courtyard where a man in his 70s sits beneath a neem tree. His white cotton kurta billows a little in the breeze. He dips a pen into a chipped inkwell and begins writing on a sheet of coarse khadi paper, handmade, slightly irregular, faintly fibrous under the touch. The letter is for his niece, who has moved to Delhi to work in a school. He writes in Hindi, gently, conversationally, without fuss. And when he's done, he folds the paper, not into a crisp rectangle, not into a sealed edge, but into a rappan tuck, a traditional Indian fold where the letter becomes its own envelope. He folds one edge in, then the other, then rolls the bottom upward and tucks it beneath a top flap. It's soft and secure, requiring no glue or wax, just care. This method, Haryar paddy folding in some regions, was widespread before envelopes became common. In fact, envelopes were often seen as unnecessary extravagance, especially in rural areas where cost, simplicity, and paper conservation mattered. Historians still argue whether the rappan tuck method spread from commercial couriers or emerged from domestic traditions rooted in textile folding. The folds mirrored sari pleats, turban ties, dhoti wraps, functional, elegant, and memorized through repetition. You notice the letter in your hands doesn't have an address on the front. That's because letters were often hand-delivered within the village, given to neighbors traveling nearby or local post runners who charged by the mile. A thumbprint might serve as a signature, a bit of thread sometimes tied around the fold as a form of gentle sealing. There's a lovely, nearly forgotten practice from this era, folded blessings. A grandparent might tuck a few grains of rice or turmeric into the fold, pressed flat between paper layers, believed to bring health and prosperity. The recipient would unfold the letter over a clean cloth, collecting the grains before reading the message. You feel a faint crackle in the paper. Perhaps one of those grains is still pressed inside. It makes you pause, as if opening it too quickly would release something sacred. In more urban areas, where stamps and envelopes were available, but still optional, people often wrote messages on the back of used accounting sheets or old newspapers, then folded them inward to hide the printed text, making the blank side the front. Even government notices were sometimes folded this way, like messages in disguise. The folds weren't perfect. They weren't supposed to be, but they were intentional. A folded corner indicated a pause in reading. A turned-down flap meant the message had been seen and acknowledged. A diagonal crease across the face might indicate urgency or affection, just like underlining a sentence. One woman, writing to her brother from Calcutta, folded her letters with one corner tucked purposefully outward. She said it was a way to keep an eye on him from afar. He'd unfold her letters backwards every time. It became a ritual. You turn the one in your hand now, trying the same outward corner fold. It holds with a whisper of tension, almost like it wants to spring back into its original shape, as if the paper remembers its journey. During festivals, some letters were even decorated with dots of sandalwood paste or colored powders dabbed at the crease. These folds were celebratory, symbolic, not just mail, but offerings of presents. A quirky tradition. Some rural households kept folded letters tied together with jute string, stored in earthen pots near the hearth. When someone passed away, the letters were sometimes burned, not as destruction, but as a release. The smoke was believed to carry the words the rest of the way. You glance down again. This letter feels like it's already halfway to being read. The fold so light it seems to breathe. You imagine its sender pressing it flat between palms, like a prayer, before it left their hands. There is humility in this fold, and dignity, and something else, too. Trust. Trust that the letter would reach. Trust that it would be opened gently. Trust that even if no one responded, the act of folding had already spoken. You lay the letter down, still wrapped softly around itself. The sun has moved slightly across your table, and the quiet weight of that fold remains. You barely notice the next letter at first. It's tucked beneath the others, small, square, and almost unassuming to catch your eye. But when you lift it, the paper surprises you. Smooth, stiff, almost glossy. Not handmade, not scented. It feels modern, but still, undeniably folded with care. Welcome to 1960s Brazil, in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of São Paulo, where the late afternoon sun streaks through iron-grilled windows and the ceiling fan clicks rhythmically overhead. The walls are faded yellow. The radio hums soft samba in the background, and a young man sits at a desk, chewing on the cap of his pen, composing a letter to a friend who's just moved to Rio. It's a casual note, a check-in, a little gossip, maybe a joke that only makes sense if you were there for the punchline. But when he finishes, he doesn't reach for an envelope. Instead, he folds the letter into a compact self-mailer, a practice growing increasingly common during this time in South America. He folds the page into a perfect square, corner to corner, edge to edge, then flips the letter and tucks one flap inward, locking it shut. On the blank side, he writes the address in careful block letters, underlined with a ruler. Then he licks a small sticker and presses it across the flap. No envelope, no frills, just the letter, folded in upon itself like a note passed in school, like something not entirely private, but somehow more personal because of it. Historians still argue whether this letter as envelope approach was born of frugality or culture. In many Brazilian towns, posting a simple note this way was not only acceptable but expected. The letter became its own shell, its own gesture, and the fold. That's where the sender's personality lived. You notice this one has a small drawing on one flap, just a doodle, maybe a bird, maybe a cartoon sun, the kind of thing that says, "Hey, I'm thinking of you." These folded letters weren't just functional, they were playful, a fringe habit from the time. Teens would write song lyrics or poetry on one panel of the letter, fold it in a specific direction, and instruct the reader, often on the outer flap, to open this side first for good luck. If you unfolded it the wrong way, well, you disrupted the rhythm. Some even believed it made the message less true. There's a light-hearted superstition here, that the right fold locks in the right emotion. Fold a love letter diagonally, the feeling might fade. Fold it in quarters, and it lasts longer. Whether true or not, people remembered the fold. The way a friend bent the top corner into a triangle, or how someone always closed their letters with the same half twist. It was signature, style, and smile, all in paper. You lift another letter, folded the same way, but in brighter paper, lime green, with pink ink bleeding through. It's from a girl to her cousin, written in fast, loopy handwriting, folded with the kind of casual expertise you only get after passing hundreds of notes in class. This wasn't elite letter locking. This was everyday intimacy. There's something endearing about the way paper was used during this era, not to guard secrets, but to connect loosely but often. The folds weren't designed to keep you out. They were invitations to unfold the ordinary, the silly, the just because. You imagine the sender of this letter slipping it into a friend's backpack, or a neighbor's mailbox, or handing it off at a bus stop with nothing but a wink. The fold did the talking. And here's a quirky twist. Some Brazilian letters from the 60s and 70s were folded in shapes that mimic matchbooks or wallets, meant to be opened slowly, panel by panel. Not because the letter was long, just because the unfolding added rhythm. A beat. A moment of pause between reading and reacting. You try it now. Fold the corners in. Flip the paper. Fold up. Fold across. Tuck the flap. It holds with a little friction. And suddenly, you're not just holding a letter. You're holding timing. You feel the fan overhead. You hear the neighbor's radio. You see a boy laughing at his own joke, adding one more exclamation point than necessary, then folding the whole thing like it matters. Because it does. You press the fold gently, then place the letter back on the pile. It's not formal. It's not ancient. But it's alive in a way the others aren't. And that's the power of folding. Even the simplest creases can carry joy. The next letter catches your eye because it isn't folded perfectly. The edges don't align quite right. One flap is slightly longer than the other, and the creases are a bit tired, worn from being opened and refolded over and over. It looks like a letter that's been read until it frayed. You're in 1970s Egypt, walking through a small, sun-drenched apartment in Cairo, where the ceiling fan clicks just a beat too slow and the scent of strong, sweet tea clings to the air. There are potted plants on the balcony. Faded lace curtains sway in a warm breeze. And somewhere behind a door left slightly ajar, an elderly man is humming to himself as he opens a drawer. Inside that drawer, dozens of folded letters, each one a small time capsule. The letter you hold now was folded by his daughter, studying abroad. It's written in Arabic script, the lines leaning leftward, like they're always on the verge of running away. The letter is 3 pages long, but it's been carefully aligned and then folded accordion style, back and forth, back and forth. Each fold opens like a sigh. This style, called the zigzag fold by some historians, is both space-saving and satisfying to open. It allows the reader to unfurl the entire message in one go, like a scroll, or a memory that won't stop once it begins. Historians still argue whether this folding style originated in North African trade routes, where ledgers and tallies needed to be long but portable. Others believe it was simply the easiest way to fold long paper with the least damage to the creases. Whatever the case, it's deeply human, because this fold invites you to read the whole story at once. No page turning, no searching for the end, just one slow, sweeping reveal. You can almost see the father now, pulling the letter open like a concertina, his eyes moving line by line without pause. And when he's done, he folds it back exactly the same way. Not because the folds matter to the post office, but because they mattered to her. A quirky family practice. Some Egyptians in this era folded letters with coins inside. Small, flat coins tucked into a crease, a token of luck or a promise to return. The coin would fall out when the letter was opened, catching the reader by surprise. And if the letter didn't carry a coin, it might carry a pressed flower, or a scrap of colorful fabric, something scented, something tactile, something that makes the fold feel like a pocket. You press your thumb along the folds now. They're soft, not fragile, just well-loved, the kind of folds made by someone who wanted the reader to unfold them carefully, not tear them open in haste. In the margins, there's a small line of English, a postscript. Don't forget to drink water, and stop skipping lunch. You imagine it being read with a laugh and an eye roll, then folded again with the affection still fresh. By the 1970s, envelopes were common, cheap, expected, but in many places, especially in families that wrote frequently, people still folded their letters into themselves, out of habit, out of tradition, out of love. There's a small collection of such letters in a Cairo museum, all folded differently, some diagonally, some into envelopes without glue, some with folded tabs that interlock like fingers, and all of them still folded, none laid flat, as if they're waiting to be read again, and again, and again. You fold the letter in your hand now, slowly, back into its zigzag shape. Each crease nestles gently into the next, like chapters closing, like music fading, and you wonder if anyone today folds like this anymore. Not because they have to, but because they want the opening to mean something. That's what folding does, you think. It slows down the message. It says, pause here. Take your time. This is worth unfolding. Outside the window, Cairo moves on, fast, loud, modern. But inside this letter, time is still folded, still quiet, still waiting. You pause before picking up the next letter, because even from here, it looks different, bulkier, heavier. The paper is dense, almost waxy to the touch, and the folds are tight, so tight they haven't softened with time. It feels like a message sealed for a journey, not a conversation. This one wasn't meant to be opened casually, it was meant to survive. You're now in Cold War era East Germany, sometime in the mid-1980s. The apartment is silent, curtains drawn despite it being morning. Outside, life goes on in stiff uniforms and gray coats. But inside, someone sits at a bare kitchen table, writing beneath a humming fluorescent bulb. A clock ticks in the next room. Too loud, too fast. This is a letter that shouldn't exist. The writer is careful, each word chosen with intent. They know someone may read this who was never supposed to. Not the recipient, not a friend, but someone in an office with files stacked in iron drawers. So, the folds matter more than ever. This letter is folded into a multi-lock fold, an evolved form of letter locking that resurged in secret of communities. The page is folded into thirds lengthwise, then in half, and then the flaps are woven, with the final corner tucked deep beneath the overlapping panels. It forms a tight block. It almost looks mechanical, and to open it without tearing takes patience, takes respect. Historians still argue whether this style returned during the Cold War out of necessity or nostalgia. Was it purely functional? Or did people long for the older, slower methods of communication in a time when everything was being watched? There's a tiny paper scar where tape once held the final flap closed. It was likely removed by the recipient, then retaped, then removed again. You wonder how many times it's been opened, or who was the first to carefully tease that flap loose. In East Berlin, paper was rationed. Envelopes, though available, were reused. Some families pressed folded letters into books, using the weight of knowledge to flatten their fears. Others folded letters into newspapers, hiding them between headlines before handing them off to trusted couriers. A fringe but fascinating detail. Some dissidents would write on cigarette paper, folded tiny, inserted into matchboxes, messages that, if intercepted, could be burned in seconds, leaving nothing but a vague scent of ash and something important lost. The letter in your hand. Thankfully, it endured. There's a passage in it, written in tiny script along the crease, that simply reads, "Keep your voice down," and beneath it, an arrow, a gentle instruction to unfold, to reveal more. You follow it, carefully, and there it is, a memory, a fragment of joy, someone's dream of a better job, a reunion, a trip that never happened. It's written in full sentences, but it feels whispered. And the fold. The fold is where the courage lived. Some writers used graphite pencils rather than ink, so the message could be erased quickly if needed. Others folded with such intricate geometry that opening the letter would destroy its shape permanently. A built-in alarm, a message with its own defense. But not all of it was bleak. Some East German teens folded coded love letters, using symbols from math or chemistry class to mask romantic words. A sodium ion meant I miss you, a water molecule, I'm still here. The folds were clean. The messages, hidden in plain sight. You smile. Even under surveillance, people find ways to fold hope. You close the letter slowly, following the memory of its folds. Each crease returns to its place with a satisfying click. This was a fold built for resilience. Not pretty, not gentle, but absolutely necessary. You place it back with care. And for a moment, the silence feels full, not empty, but held, like a message too big for the paper, carried in the fold instead. The next letter surprises you, not for its content, not for its paper, but for how deliberately it seems to be folded wrong. The edges misalign on purpose. The final flap tucks upward instead of down, and you get the sense that this wasn't a mistake. It was a code. You're now in 1980s rural Nigeria, sitting on a woven mat in the shade of a tamarind tree. Around you, the day hums with warmth and distant laughter. A woman in her 30s smooths a sheet of paper against a knee, pauses, and begins to fold. Not the usual way, but her way. Her fold is a signature. She's writing to her brother, who left the village years ago for a job in Lagos. Her handwriting flows in Yoruba, accented by little curls at the end of each line, as if her pen is dancing at the edge of speech. Her letter is affectionate. News of the family, a question about when he'll return, and a reminder, don't forget to bring back Akpa and new shoes. When she finished writing, she folds the paper in a way taught to her by her grandmother, 3 times along the short edge, then once diagonally, with the bottom corner peeking out like a tongue. It looks playful, but it's also practical. You see, in many parts of West Africa during this period, folding styles varied from household to household, often serving as a kind of invisible signature. If someone else tried to imitate the fold, the family would know. Historians still argue whether these distinct folds were developed for protection, identification, or simply habit. But what's clear is this: in a time before universal literacy, folds carried meaning just as much as words. There's a lovely tradition here, sometimes called the fold of favor. A young man writing to a girl he admired would fold his note in a pattern that mimicked a fan or a flower. If she returned the letter folded exactly the same way, it meant no. If she changed the fold, just slightly, it meant maybe. If she sent it back with an added crease, yes, no reply at all, that was an answer too. You turn the letter in your hands now. It feels light, like it could float on wind. The paper is cheap, lined notebook, faintly yellowed at the edges, but the folds give it structure. Without the fold, it's just paper. With it, it's a vessel. And here's a quirky trick used by children to fold a note like a fish: 2 wide fins and a little tail. Meant you're late for school or don't tell mama. These folded fish notes often flew between desks or down hallways, passed by hand or tucked into backpacks. You try the fold now. It's trickier than it looks. The corners don't quite meet unless you know the rhythm. But once it clicks, it feels right, like a message sealed in laughter. Letters in rural Nigeria were often hand-delivered across towns, passed between travelers, or slipped under doors. Many weren't mailed at all. Instead, they were kept in the fold, in a wallet, a dress pocket, or even under a pillow, waiting for the right moment to hand over. There's even a tale of a bride in the 1980s who folded a letter from her mother into her wedding scarf, carrying it with her through the ceremony. The letter itself was only a few lines long, but the fold was what stayed with her, because in some families, the fold is what's inherited, not the handwriting, not even the language, but the way a letter closes. You press your thumb along the final crease of the letter you're holding. It gives slightly, then holds. It feels like something ancient disguised as something new. And you realize, folding is a language of its own. It says, I'm thinking of you. It says, you'll know this came from me. It says, here is my voice, wrapped in quiet. You place the letter down, still folded, still angled just slightly off-center, like a wink, and in the still air of the room, you feel it. That small joy of knowing you've unfolded something only meant for your hands. The next letter in your hands has that unmistakable whisper of waxed paper, slightly stiff, faintly translucent at the edges, like it's been protecting its message from the world. It smells faintly of pencil shavings and detergent. Not romantic, exactly, but deeply domestic. You're in 1990s Japan, sitting at a low table in a tidy, summit apartment just outside Kyoto. The sliding paper doors are open, the kettle murmurs on the burner, and a teenage girl is hunched over stationery with pink cranes printed along the margins. She's wearing a school uniform. Her hair is tied in a neat ponytail. Her pen skips once before she starts. She writes to her best friend, who moved away after graduation. The letter is about nothing and everything, about math tests and vending machines and a boy with lopsided socks. And when she's done, she doesn't reach for an envelope. Not yet. First, she folds. In Japan, letter folding has a long history, dating back centuries to origata and tsutsumi traditions. Ceremonial folding styles once used for gifts, letters, even currency. But by the 1990s, this has taken a new form, the decorative letter fold, where the paper becomes the envelope, the message, and the gesture all in one. The most popular, the heart fold. Fold the corners in, rotate the paper, fold again, and suddenly, a small paper heart appears, sealed not with glue but with symmetry. Historians still argue whether these origami-like folds developed out of formal etiquette or modern schoolgirl innovation. Likely both. Girls would trade techniques like secrets, the cat fold, the house fold, the clamshell. Folded messages passed between desks or slipped into bento boxes. This letter in your hand, it's a strawberry fold, a circular tuck that ends with a little twist at the top. It holds itself shut like a secret. You're almost reluctant to open it. You don't want to disturb the shape, but you do. Inside, the message is short, a few lines, a sticker, a pressed petal from a hydrangea, and at the bottom, a tiny drawing, to rice balls with smiling faces. It's silly, it's precious, and it only works because of the fold. There's a quirky practice during this time. Stationery brands would print folding diagrams directly on the back of the paper. Instructions for how to fold a bear head or butterfly letter, complete with stickers to place at the seal point. Letter folding had become fashionable, a kind of papery performance, and in households steeped in more traditional culture, children were sometimes taught how to fold a letter without touching the writing, a precise art, ensuring fingers never smudged the ink, especially if it was a condolence note or a formal invitation. You fold the strawberry letter back now, a bit clumsily. It doesn't sit quite right at first, but then the top flap tucks in, and there it is again, a perfect circle. You can almost imagine the girl who folded it, tongue poking out in concentration, hoping her fold said more than the words could, because in Japan, sometimes the style of folding says what the mouth cannot. A square fold is direct, a triangle is playful, a rounded tuck is bashful, and a heart, well, that one speaks for itself. You think of the care behind each crease. The late-night practice runs, the girls whispering about which corner to start with, the way they learned to express themselves in folds before they found the right words. Even today, many adults in Japan keep folded letters from their childhood, tucked into boxes beneath beds, between comic books, inside scrapbooks, not just for what the letters said, but for how the paper held that time, shaped it, carried it. There's a saying, words fade, but folds remember. You run your finger over the curved edge of the fold again. It's not ancient, not noble, but in its neatness, its joy, its strange tenderness, it's perfect. You place the letter back in the pile, still folded into its strawberry shape, and somehow, everything feels a little softer. Now you're holding something quiet, so quiet it almost feels like it might vanish if you breathe too hard. The paper is thin, ivory-toned, and almost sheer when held to the light. It's folded with a reverence that speaks more than ink. A note barely written, barely sealed, yet somehow heavy with presence. You're in early 2000s Iran, just before dusk, in a small house at the edge of Yazd, where the streets are lined with blue-tiled domes and sun-warmed clay walls. Inside, there's a table draped in a patterned cloth. On it, a half-full teacup and a single sheet of paper folded with hands that were trembling slightly. This is a letter from a poet. He knows his time is short. Age, illness, maybe both, have thinned his script and turned his folds slower. The words are minimal. He doesn't ramble. He reflects. A line about light falling across his courtyard. A memory of his daughter's wedding. A note about the neighbor's apricot tree blooming again. And then he folds the letter. Not with symmetry, not with flourish, but with grace. A long edge in, then the opposite, then a soft roll upward, ending in a tucked curve that hugs the message inward, as though the paper is cradling the words. This is known, sometimes, as the crescent fold. Historians still argue whether the crescent fold arose from religious symbolism or personal artistry. Some say it mimics the moon, Islam's most recognized symbol. Others believe it's simply how elders learned to protect paper in a country where form and meaning often intertwine. You open the fold slowly. Inside is a verse, not quite rhymed, not quite prose. It slips across the page like wind over sand. The sun never leaves, but always returns, folded into the sky. You sit still for a moment. This isn't just correspondence. This is farewell. A fringe tradition among Iranian poets and elders was to fold final letters in three, then tuck them into the Quran on a page with meaning, not to hide the letter, but to let it rest among words that endure. Some families discover these folded pages years later, long after the sender is gone, tucked between lines of comfort, of judgment, of paradise. You imagine that, too? A quiet discovery, long after morning, a fold opening like a sigh. I was thinking of you, even then. There's another small ritual in some homes. When someone leaves on a long journey, a letter is written and folded in silence. No words are spoken while folding. The idea being that words spoken aloud might catch the wind and twist the sender's meaning. And silence. Silence keeps the wish pure. The letter in your hands was likely folded that way. You can feel it, not just from the stillness of the paper, but from the care. No torn edge, no smudged ink, just the gentle pressure of thought made tangible. You fold it again now, following the curve. The paper resists at first, like it remembers the warmth of the last hands that touched it, but then it gives, and the crescent holds. You place it beside the others, and here's a curious superstition. In some Iranian villages, if a folded letter survives a house fire, it's believed that the sender's blessing remains, and if a letter unfolds on its own over time, if it slips open inside a drawer or box, that means it has something left to say. You glance back at the letter you just folded, still sealed, still waiting. Maybe it already said what it needed, or maybe not quite yet. You leave it be, and let it rest in its crescent shape, like a soft promise wrapped in quiet dusk. The next letter feels uncertain. Its paper is smooth but thin, folded hastily yet precisely, like someone kneaded it out of their hands before they changed their mind. The corners are crisp, the flaps are uneven. There's no decoration, no signature on the outside. But you know immediately, this was a letter sent in a time of change. You're in 2011 Tunisia, in the days after the first rumblings of what the world would later call the Arab Spring. The streets outside are loud with footsteps, slogans, voices raised not in chaos, but in hope. Inside a quiet apartment, a young woman writes by phone light during a power cut, the city temporarily swallowed by dark. Her handwriting is quick, not because she's careless, but because the emotion is too large to stay still. She writes to her cousin in Paris, tells her what it feels like, the excitement, the fear, the disbelief. She doesn't trust email, not now, so she folds the paper herself. No envelope, no stamp yet, just the act of making it ready. It's a slanted rectangle fold, a form borrowed from Western-style note passing, but tilted at an angle. It holds tight when pressed, but flares slightly open at the top, as though resisting closure. A fold of action, a fold that says, I don't have time to waste. Historians still argue whether such urgency folds should be considered part of the letter-lucking tradition or seen as a modern adaptation, form following feeling, rather than rule. But either way, there's no mistaking it. This letter wasn't meant to sit in a drawer. It was meant to move. There's a fringe belief that letters folded during revolutions, moments of upheaval, carry an energy. Some say you shouldn't unfold them too quickly. Others say the second fold, the one done just before sending, is where the soul of the message lives. This one feels that way. She wrote quickly, but folded carefully, folded with breath, pressed the edges, recreased the flap that wouldn't sit right. There's a little tear at the corner, probably from being opened and refolded too many times. Maybe by a friend, a neighbor, or maybe by a customs agent who couldn't read the message but recognized its urgency. This letter, like so many from that moment, is not about beauty, or flirtation, or formality. It's about witness. And there's something different about letters written when history tilts. They're folded not just to carry messages, but to contain the weight of that tilt, as though the sender is saying, "Here, hold this with me." You unfold it gently. There's a name at the top. No salutation. Just, "I don't know where to start, but I need you to know." And already, your breath slows, because you do know. You know what it means to feel something too large for your chest, to write it down, to fold it so it doesn't burst open on the way. There's a modern quirk here too. Many young people, lacking envelopes, began using folded notebook paper again, returning to school folds and corner tucks. A protest letter tucked into a shoe, a goodbye note left in a stairwell, a plea folded for times and handed to a journalist. The folds weren't intricate, but they were intentional, because folding, in this context, isn't decoration. It's resistance. You fold the letter again, slowly. Your fingers mirror hers, not because you know the exact pattern, but because some folds are made from instinct, a need to close something carefully, a hope that it will open in the right hands. You place the letter on top of the stack. Its top flap still lifts a little, like a whisper not yet finished. Maybe you leave it that way. Maybe you don't need to press it down just yet, because sometimes the fold is still happening. This one barely looks like a letter at all. It's small, just a slip of paper, almost square, and folded with such practiced simplicity that you wonder if it was ever meant to be opened at all. There's no seal, no address, no ink visible from the outside, just a quiet square, the size of your palm, nestled between more deliberate envelopes and ornate folds. But as you hold it, you recognize it for what it is, a message folded in person, handed directly from one palm to another. And now, you're in modern-day South Korea, somewhere between a train platform and a quiet school hallway, sometime in the late 2010s. A boy has just scribbled something onto his homework margins, not equations, not notes, but a few words meant only for one person. It's not a love confession exactly, but it's not that either. Maybe it's a thank you. Maybe it's you okay. Maybe it's just don't look behind you. The words are casual, the paper unremarkable, but the fold, it's precise. A perfect choco pie fold, a style passed between students for decades, named after the round, wrap snack cake. It's a method of turning even the plainest scrap of paper into something compact, adorable, unmistakably secret. You open it with your thumbs. One corner tucks out, another in. Like origami's quiet cousin, the paper unfolds with soft resistance, one panel at a time, until the message reveals itself with all the drama of a drum roll. Historians still argue whether modern Korean school folds are purely aesthetic or carry symbolic weight. But ask any student, and they'll tell you, how you fold it matters, not just for looks, for tone, for intent, for whether your message lands as cool, cute, or cringeworthy. There's a fringe cultural detail here. During school festivals, some students write anonymous encouragements, called cheer notes, and fold them into origami hearts or stars before leaving them in lockers or pencil cases. The shape becomes the emotion. A tiny paper crane says, "I believe in you." A circle fold says, "Smile, idiot." You try folding this one back into shape. It's harder than it looks. The corners must curve just right. The last flap is a puzzle piece, and when it fits, you feel that little spark of completion, the quiet click of something closing the way it was meant to. In South Korea, even in an age of text messages, these folded notes persist. Maybe because paper holds warmth in a way that screens don't. Maybe because a fold is tangible. It shows that someone took the time to crease, to align, to shape a message not just with hands, but with presence. And in a culture where showing emotion directly is sometimes frowned upon, the fold becomes the flourish, the wink, the confession wrapped in geometry. You look at the message again, just 4 words, but the folds say so much more. This wasn't scribbled. It was made. You smile, thinking about how many of these notes have lived in jacket pockets, beneath phone cases, inside lunchboxes, notes that were never replied to, or passed on, or kept forever in secret corners of drawers. Some folds become talismans, not for what they say, but for what they don't. You fold the note back one more time. It's clumsier now, your fingers less trained than a teenager's, but the shape returns anyway, like muscle memory inherited by paper. You place it down. It holds perfectly, still silent, still saying everything. You barely notice the next letter at first. It's pressed flat, thin as a leaf, its paper almost translucent and folded so perfectly it disappears between the larger pages. But, as you slide it free, it flutters open slightly, an invitation rather than a command. You don't need to force this one. It's ready to be read. You're in contemporary Finland, in a lakeside cabin where winter has settled in, soft and absolute. The air smells like wood smoke and pine resin. A kettle whistles in the background, and someone, maybe a grandfather, sits by the window, carefully folding a letter written on rice paper, the kind used in craft stores and calligraphy classes. He's writing to his grandson, who lives in Helsinki now. The letter is short, a few observations about the weather, a story about a fox seen darting through the snow, a gentle reminder to eat more than noodles. But when the writing ends, the ritual begins. The man folds the paper in a method known in the region as the window fold. It begins with the center, then both sides, and finally, the top and bottom edges close in like shutters. The finished shape resembles a small envelope, but without adhesive, without fasteners. It closes on itself like a breath exhaled. Historians still argue whether the window fold has Scandinavian origins or if it migrated northward via trade and seafaring routes. Some link it to 19th century Swedish military correspondence, where efficiency and protection were paramount. Others say it simply emerged from practical quietness, the kind of functionality that doesn't need explanation. You unfold the letter now, watching each flap come undone with such soft intent that it feels like you're rewinding something. The creases aren't harsh. They don't crack. They guide. And there's something beautifully Finnish about that. You see, in Finland, simplicity, in a style. It's a language, one that often prefers gesture over elaboration. That's why these folds matter. Not because they dazzle, but because they disappear. There's a modern quirk in this letter, too. A tiny pressed birch leaf is folded into the paper, barely the size of a coin. Maybe it's symbolic, maybe it's just decoration, but you smile at the idea that something from the forest still lives inside this message. A fringe practice among Finnish crafters is to fold letters using Himeli-inspired geometry, those delicate, straw-based structures once hung at Christmas. These folds mimic the angles, forming tiny abstract shapes when opened flat. Sometimes it's just for beauty. Sometimes it's to honor the tradition of bringing the outside in. You fold the letter back again. The paper creaks faintly. It almost sighs. And once the final flap slides into place, it becomes what it was before, a gentle box, unassuming, unboastful. Just a message taking a nap. You imagine the grandson in his city apartment, receiving it between bills and flyers, maybe opening it on the tram or late at night with frozen fingers. Maybe he doesn't even read the whole thing right away. Maybe he just folds it back and slips it into a jacket pocket, comforted by its shape. Because the shape, here, is the message. Not urgent, not loud, but present, like a fire that never flares, only glows. You place the letter on top of the others. Its flatness now feels intentional. The silence of its fold echoes long after your fingers leave the page. And in that silence, a truth. Some letters don't need to speak loudly to be heard. Some folds don't close things off. They hold them open, just enough for warmth to slip through. The next letter you lift feels newer, familiar, even. The paper is crisp, computer printed, its weight modern, its font unmistakably digital. But despite the email era, this one has clearly made a physical journey. No stamp, no envelope, just an A4 sheet, tri-folded in exact thirds, sealed shut with a single sticker shaped like a cat paw. You're now in post-pandemic San Francisco, somewhere in the hazy lull of 2021, where cafes smell of sanitizer and sourdough, and the world is reeling the texture of connection. In a quiet apartment full of succulents and half-finished jigsaw puzzles, someone sits at a dining table under a hanging light, writing by keyboard, but folding by hand. This is a letter to a friend they haven't seen in almost 2 years. Maybe an old roommate. Maybe someone from the yoga studio. The words are printed neatly, double-spaced, polite, personal. But when it's finished, the sender chooses to fold instead of click. There's something deliberate in that choice. They fold the sheet in the classic trifold, the kind used for brochures, business letters, awkward resumes. But this time, the fold isn't corporate, it's intimate. They line the edges with slow care, use a bone folder, maybe, press the final crease not with haste, but with gratitude. Because this is a letter meant to be felt, not just read. Historians still argue whether the recent revival of folded letters marks a nostalgia trend or a genuine shift in emotional expression. Is it just aesthetic rebellion against screens? Or something deeper? There's a fringe community online. Yes, a subreddit, where people post videos of themselves folding letters and sealing them with washi tape. The folds range from elegant to absurd. Letter burritos, pentagon folds, spirals. The common thread, a desire to slow down. One popular post shows a person folding a letter to a long-distance partner, tucking inside a tea bag. Not to be steeped, just to smell like home. You open this letter slowly, the sticker peels away without tearing. The paper sighs softly as the folds relax. The message inside isn't poetic, it's not even long, but it says everything plainly. Thought of you today? Hope the sky is kind. You sit with that for a moment. Sometimes the smallest words weigh the most. You run your fingers along the inside of the folds. There's a faint indentation, likely from the pressure of the bone folder, the tool some people now use for precise creasing. It's a gentle scar of care. There's a modern contradiction at play here. Folding letters in the digital age doesn't save time. It doesn't improve efficiency, but it adds depth. It turns the message into an object, a keepsake, something that can be held in a hand rather than hovered over on a screen. Even in professional circles, there's a quiet return to hand-folded correspondence. Designers, therapists, artists, people whose jobs require humanity, are folding again. A quick thank you note, printed, signed, folded, mailed. It feels deliberate, rare, remembered. You refold the letter now, retracing the original folds. The paper slides into place like it wants to return. You smooth it once more, run a thumb across the sticker, and place it gently with the others. And there, amidst ancient folds, wax seals, and crumbling parchment, this simple trifold sits like it belongs, not despite its modernity, but because of it. Because folding isn't about the era, it's about intention. And in this moment, with the letter now closed again, the softest thought crosses your mind. Some things, when folded with care, don't wrinkle, they settle. And now, the final letter. It waits at the bottom of the stack, tucked in the folds of every story you've just unfolded. There's no stamp, no sender, no writing on the outside. Only one soft sheet of creamy paper, unmarked, untouched, except for the faintest creases waiting to be followed. This one is yours. You're sitting at a small desk, maybe in your room, maybe in a hotel you don't remember booking, maybe on the quiet side of nowhere. The light is low, a candle flickers nearby, or perhaps a lamp with a humming filament. There's a pen in your hand and the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. You place the paper in front of you, and you begin, not to write, but to fold. You start slowly, not sure which corner to fold first, but your fingers remember, even if your mind doesn't. You fold one edge in, align it with the long side, press the crease with your thumb, then fold again, the opposite side, a mirror of the first. You smile at how even the folds are, not perfect, but earnest. This is the open-end fold, a beginner's fold, some say. But it's also a fold of invitation, one that doesn't lock the letter in, one that suggests, you can open this again. You don't need to be careful. This is meant to be revisited. Historians still argue whether the open-end fold existed before industrial envelopes or was invented by those who couldn't quite get corners to behave. But it persists because it's forgiving, like a door left ajar, like a promise still becoming. You keep folding. You fold the top down, gently, not sharply, just enough to keep things held. You aren't sealing anything. You're shaping it. This is not a goodbye. It's a pause, a quirky modern detail. In some mindfulness circles, folding a blank letter is used as a grounding technique. No writing, just the act of folding, each crease like an exhale, a tactile form of meditation. They call it paper breathing. You like that? Because that's what this feels like. You're folding your breath, your thoughts, your small hopes for tomorrow. You could write something? Of course. A name, a secret, a date. But maybe you don't need to. Maybe the folds say enough. The creases tell their own story, a story of quiet, of presence, of care. You run your fingers along the finished edges. The paper holds itself together now. Lightly, willingly. It's folded, but not closed. It's waiting. Maybe for a word. Maybe just for time. You place it on the table beside the others. You look at the pile now. Letters from across centuries, across oceans, across love and war and boredom and joy. Some neat, some wrinkled, some folded with trembling hands, some folded without a thought. And yours, just folded now. Still warm, still breathing, and now everything is folded. The corners are tucked. The creases rest. The paper is still. You breathe slowly, letting the silence of all those letters wrap around you. You picture the folds, each one like a small door, or a lullaby, or the last page of a well-worn book. Your room is quieter now, the light softer. Even the shadows on the walls seem to settle into place, like they've been listening all along. There's something comforting in knowing that people, across time, across cultures, have always folded letters, not just to send them, but to hold something in, a thought, a hope, a goodbye, or simply the shape of their day. You trace one final crease with your finger. No rush, no need to open it. Some things are meant to stay folded. After all, outside, the night deepens. Maybe a breeze rustles through trees. Maybe a dog barks far off. But inside, there's only this quiet hum of paper, of stories folded and remembered. Let your breath slow. Let the folds blur. Let sleep rise like a letter you don't need to read yet. Because the story is already held. Already safe. Already here. Good night. Letter folder. Sleep well. Good night.